I'm sharing this because if I don't come back, well, the more people that know what happened, the better. Maybe then someone will finally believe us. Every year since our college graduation, my best friend Liz and I would go on vacation together and visit a new city. As we were planning the trip for late summer 2 years ago, she got an email saying she'd earned a free week-long stay at a hotel. She tends to travel a lot for business, so it's not unusual for her to get a free night every now and then. One of the locations she could redeem it at was somewhere we hadn't been before, and it looked ritzy. It sounded perfect. As soon as we walked in the lobby, though, something felt off. I don't know how to explain it, other than that it had weird vibes. It looked like an old building that had been recently renovated, but the bright colors, lights, paintings, it felt like someone just slapped a thin, cheery veneer over decades worth of caked-on misery. The air just felt heavy. Liz didn't seem to notice it. At least, not at first. The guy at the check-in desk stared at us for a while before muttering that he needed to talk to his manager. We were a bit worried that we were about to hear that the email she'd received had been a scam. But, to our relief, he came back with a grin and said they'd upgraded our room. The city skyline and faint mountains in the distance we could see from our window won me over. That first day was fine. But when I woke up the next morning, Liz was sitting motionless on her bed, her back to me. Liz? I repeated her name several times, before finally walking over to tap her on the shoulder. Hey. She finally turned to me, spoke quietly as if someone else might be listening. Did you hear it last night? I shook my head. Oh. She looked embarrassed for a moment, like she was unsure if she should continue. I couldn't sleep, not with the scratching behind the wall, she whispered eventually. I don't like it. I'm a heavy sleeper. A bit too heavy, honestly. At home, where it's just me, I have to set multiple alarms to make sure I wake up on time for work. And I've literally slept through a fire alarm once. Luckily, it was a false alarm. Liz was the opposite. Every little noise would wake her, so she always tended to have a rough first night or two as she became accustomed to the sounds of a new place. I thought maybe after a couple of nights she'd get used to it, or chalk it up to the building settling, especially in such an old place. I offered to ask for a different room, but she was worried they'd charge us. She said she'd just try and ignore it. The day before we were supposed to check out, though, she shook me awake, her eyes wide and frantic as she stood over me. She'd moved her nightstand aside and was pointing at a small door, 3 or so feet tall, that had been behind it. The door was old-looking, dark wood with an antique knob, and stood in contrast to everything else in the bright and modern-looking room. Did you open it? She looked at me like I was out of my mind for even asking, and backed away as I approached it, for good measure. I figured that once we looked, we'd both feel better. I was wrong. As I carefully pushed it open, the smell of rust and bleach hit me immediately. The narrow space was long. It went back further than my phone light could reach from where I stood. After a few feet, it faded into blackness. Since it was only as tall and wide as the small door, I realized I'd have to crawl on my hands and knees to see how far back it went. I hate being in the dark and can't stand small spaces. But when I looked over my shoulder at Liz and saw the bags under her eyes, the expression on her face, I figured I owed it to her to at least take a look. So, I crawled in. Once I was a few feet inside, I saw that the small and narrow space ended at another wall, one plastered in yellowing wallpaper. It looked so old. I guess it was probably a part of the original hotel. The dark, patterned carpet was dotted with stains, which seemed to be contributing to at least part of the strong smell. As I backed out, I thought I heard a faint whisper coming from behind the old wallpaper in front of me. As soon as I was all the way out, I had to fight the urge to slam the door shut and run. It felt so wrong in there. I wasn't sure what the purpose of that space had once been, but even then, I knew it was nothing good. "Hey," I whispered as soon as the door was closed, as I tried to nonchalantly move the end table back in front of it. "Why don't we pack up? We can find a different hotel for tonight." She seemed a bit calmer, said she could hang in there for the final night. After having been in that small space behind our wall, the thought of sleeping there another night honestly freaked me the hell out. But I figured that if she could make it through the last night, then so could I. After we turned out the lights that night, I remember seeing her dark silhouette sitting on the edge of her bed, motionless until I fell asleep. That was the last time I ever saw her. When I woke up, it was almost noon. Both of our alarms were blaring. We were supposed to have checked out hours earlier. My confusion quickly turned to panic when I realized Liz wasn't in the room. Her suitcase, purse, phone, everything was still there. The main door was locked and chained from the inside, too. At first, I couldn't think of where else she could be. Until it hit me. There was one place I hadn't checked. The nightstand was still in front of the door, but I was fairly certain it was in a slightly different spot than we had left it the day before. Reluctantly, I slid it aside. "Liz?" No answer. She wasn't there. I did see, though, what I thought had been a wall was open slightly. I pushed it tentatively and took a sharp breath when I saw it led into a tunnel. It went so far back, far beyond the reach of the beam of my phone light. It looked endless. "Liz?" I got no response other than my own voice echoing back through the narrow space. I tried to tell myself it would be okay. I had to go in, especially if Liz had gone in there too. I took a deep breath, nudged the false wall all the way open, and I entered. As I crawled on my hands and knees with my phone ungracefully held between my teeth, I tried not to think about the tight space and the pitch blackness as far as I could see in front of me, or picture what Liz would have been doing down there. I tried not to focus on the streaks of nearly dried blood along the floor. I had to keep going. I knew that Liz would do the same for me. I realized that I wasn't even sure how long she'd been gone for. I promised myself the walls were not shrinking around me. It was my imagination. That this dark expanse couldn't go on forever. Eventually, the tight darkness would end. I kept repeating it to myself over and over as a mantra, just to keep myself going, to try and distract myself from the feeling of despair that seemed to fill the place. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel ended, opening into a room without lights or windows, but it was at least large enough that I could stand and stretch out my cramped muscles. All I could make out was wall-to-wall, dark, crumbling bricks, and a weak-looking set of stairs that led above and below. It was so quiet there, so eerie. It was easy to forget that I was in a city packed with people, still inside a bustling hotel. When I shined my light upwards into the pitch blackness above my head, I could see the stairs leading to other platforms like the one I was standing on. It looked like the rooms above and below ours had similar tunnels. The smell of bleach had long been replaced by the scent of mildew and old things. It felt so wrong back here in a way I couldn't put my finger on, that I couldn't help but shiver when wondering why it had been designed this way, what it had been used for. I assumed the stairs to the tunnels above me led to other rooms, so I went down, the protesting metal echoing up into the huge empty space above my head. I finally reached a heavy door, and after being in the dark for so long, the bright sunlight hurt my eyes when I opened it. I was looking into the back alley outside, around the corner from where the hotel seemed to end. The door was covered with the same bricks as the rest of the building, it was so discreet that when I closed it behind me, it blended in perfectly with the outside wall. I remember running back inside and bracing myself against the counter while I tried to convey what I'd found to anyone who would listen. I still have the image in my mind of how the dried blood on my palm stood out starkly on the white marble. It was all I could focus on as the manager tried to calm me down. He said Liz probably just wandered off. People go off on their own all the time to explore the city, he told me. She'd likely come back later. She never did. I was the one that called the police, and the officer that came out chatted casually with the hotel manager for a long time. They checked the room, I showed him the door, but he didn't seem concerned. He just repeated what the manager said. Maybe she decided to start over and didn't want to be found. I was hysterical, pointed out that her purse and her phone were still in the room. She hadn't even taken her shoes. It's not uncommon, he told me, leaning in a little too close. A warning less subtle than his words was written across his face. For people to visit a city like this and never leave. I drove around for hours, asking shop owners and people outside if they'd seen her. None of them had. Eventually, I had to go home, back to work. The official story is still that she just left, of her own volition. I don't believe it. Neither does her family, or fiancé. Every so often, he and I would drive up there, just on the off chance that anyone had seen her, but we'd always get the same answer. He's the one that had the idea to book the same room again, to see what we could find in the tunnels. He must have called dozens of times. He tried to make a reservation, ask if room 347 or any of the ones directly above it are available, but they'd always tell him no. We hadn't lost all hope, but we'd certainly lost most of it. Until, a few days ago, I recently received an email invite letting me know I'd earned a free week, just like the one Liz received 2 years ago. I went to check in, and after looking me over, the guy manning the desk said he needed to get his manager. The manager, the same one as before, came out in person, and I was worried he'd turn me away, but he simply smiled and informed me that my room had been upgraded. I'm sure you can guess my room number. I've been trying to stay awake each night, although, after everything that happened, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep here even if I wanted to. Every night, I've just been sitting in the dark, listening to the sounds coming from behind that awful door. Sounds that I could swear are a bit louder, a bit closer each night. I'm supposed to check out tomorrow morning. I have a feeling that tonight, I'll finally find out what happened to Liz. Wish me luck. I'm sorry it took so long for me to get this post updated. Everything that happened has been, well, a lot to process. At first, I didn't even want to write it down. I didn't want to relive that night, but I guess I can't avoid it forever. Especially knowing what I know now, that I may never have another chance to. It's been almost 2 years to the day from my first post, when my best friend Liz disappeared from room 347 in the middle of the final night of our stay at a swanky hotel. I woke up alone the next morning to the door still bolted from the inside, to see she had left everything behind. The only place she could have gone was through the dark, narrow space behind the small door and false wall, leading from our room into a space that never should have existed. Even after crawling through it myself, I never found her. The manager of the hotel and the police were not just insistent that she had left of her own volition, their tones and expressions became almost threatening when I pushed further. Her fiancé Jared and I have been searching for her ever since. When I received the invitation to stay at that same hotel, in that same room, of course I knew the risks. But in the hopes that it could give us even a slim chance of finding Liz. I accepted it. So, I bought a little canister of triple-action pepper spray and packed my bag. Something in the back of my mind told me that to bring Jared with me meant I would never find out what happened to her that night. I scheduled an email to go out to him the morning after the final night of my stay, explaining where I'd gone. You know, just in case I never came back. I've been home for a while now, and I'm still struggling to put some of the pieces together. I'm starting to accept that there are some things I may never fully understand. I'm afraid of what may be coming next. During my recent stay, I didn't spend much time in the room, with its overpowering smell of bleach, mingled with something else I couldn't quite place. Mostly, I tried to search the surrounding city for anything I may have missed before, and of course, explored every inch of that hotel that I could. Details that I either didn't catch during our first day or pay enough attention to are now haunting me. Details such as how a ritzy-looking hotel in the middle of a popular tourist destination never seemed to have anyone else in it. Or how there was no way to get to the 7th floor. The button so casually skipped from 6 to 8 on the lone elevator that I hadn't caught it during our first day. From the main stairs, where there should have been an entrance to the hallway, the landing just led to a solid wall. Once I felt that I'd seen as much of the 3rd floor as I could, I decided to venture deeper into the 4th floor on the 2nd day. On first glance, when the elevator doors opened, it seemed as modern and welcoming as my own floor, albeit with that same feeling of wrongness lurking just below the surface. Once I made it down the hallway and rounded a blind corner, though, the new carpet and cheery paint all stopped abruptly. I found myself surrounded by the original fading wallpaper, stains marring the swirling patterns of the torn carpets. Even the light fixtures along the walls looked dated. Most struggled to stay on at all. I finally turned back and ran when they appeared to give out and plunged the windowless hallway into total darkness without warning. When I calmed down, I checked the other floors. Other than the 3rd, each one I could access all had that same feature. Once you reached the portion out of sight from the elevator, the facade abruptly fell away. Whenever I crossed over to the old unrenovated side, I always felt a wave of discomfort. That prey instinct of when there's no one else around you, but you can tell that you are most certainly not alone. Traveling down those halls felt like stepping back in time, but to a time that was clearly best left forgotten. Initially, I told myself that this was their way of saving money, neglecting the portions that most guests would never see, trying to find some source of courage in willful ignorance. But when I looked closely, I'd see hints that I was not the first person to walk those halls. A cracked and worn plastic hotel key, still far too modern for those ancient-looking doors. The glint of a single lost earring. Coming across items left behind from those that came before me made me wonder if their owners had ever made it out. The words from the police officer 2 years before were still fresh in my mind. It's not uncommon for people to visit a city like this and never leave. I wondered how many other grieving friends and family members he'd spoken those words to. The night I found it, I'd been wandering around one of those eerily quiet floors. I'd gone further into the winding hallways than I'd ever felt brave enough to before, when I was drawn to a bit of brick peeking out from under cracked plaster and peeling wallpaper in the distance. It was almost entirely bathed in shadows, just beyond where the struggling hall lights had long since given up, and seemed even older than everything else around it. There was a thin gap in the mortar, and while it was so dark that I couldn't see anything, I could feel a faint, stale breeze that carried with it an overpowering smell of rotting meat. Gagging, I turned around abruptly to see the hotel manager just a couple feet behind me. I wouldn't have been able to see him in the shadowy corner at all, save for his eyes glinting at me, unnatural looking in the low light. I pushed past him without incident, but I couldn't help but wonder if that hadn't been the first time he'd silently followed me down the dimly lit hallways. After that, I made more of an effort to avoid him and his predatory smile, which was easier said than done since he always seemed to be working, almost as if he never left the hotel. Every floor I could access had a similar makeshift wall in the same place. I eventually realized it was once a second elevator shaft, since bricked in and plastered over. Once, in the near silence, I thought I heard the sound of something moving behind it. It was probably easier to seal it off than to fix it, I told myself at the time. I preferred that explanation, rather than to acknowledge my distinct feeling that there was something, not someone, something, back there that I had no desire to meet. Eventually, I reached the final night of my stay, no closer to finding out what happened to her. The only thing left that I could think to do was to try to recreate what I believed may have happened to her that night. As I prepared for bed, I shoved my phone in my pajama pocket and grabbed my little can of pepper spray. My grand plan at that point was to pretend to be asleep and see if anyone came for me that night. If they did, I'd use the pepper spray and try to get a photo of them. Some sort of proof that Liz hadn't left of her own volition. Something that could help us find her. It may not have been the best idea. Looking back, it was a pretty shitty one. One that had seemed so much better when I'd been packing my bag in my well-lit bedroom at home the week before. But I knew it would be the last chance I'd ever get to find out what happened to Liz. After glancing nervously at my small can of pepper spray, I grabbed the Swiss Army knife off my keychain and shoved it in the other pocket for good measure. I began to wonder, as I stared up at the dark ceiling that night in the exact same room she disappeared from 2 years earlier, if they invited me there specifically with the intent of nothing happening. I'd been telling anyone who would listen for years all about Liz's disappearance, about the narrow, dark space in our room that I'd crawled through. Jared had been doing the same. Like I said in my last post, he'd been trying to book that same room for years with no luck. What better way to further discount our concerns than for me to have a perfectly normal stay? Of course, nothing would happen, I realized, disappointed, although I couldn't help but feel the tiniest bit of guilt-tinged relief. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the old hinges of the small door protesting. As it was pulled open from the inside, I was finally about to learn what happened to Liz all those years ago. And after what I found, what I'll share here soon, well, I almost wish I hadn't. 2 years ago, my best friend disappeared from a hotel during the final week of our stay. I'd awoken to find myself alone, the door still locked and bolted from the inside, meaning the only place she could have gone was through the small, hidden door in our room. When I brought my concerns to the hotel manager and the police, they were unhelpful, insistent that Liz had left of her own volition. The harder I pressed them on it, the more the facade of dismissiveness began to fade away, revealing the malice that lurked just below the surface. So, when I received my own invitation, 2 years later to the day, I knew I had to go. And I knew that to truly find out what had happened to her, I had to go alone. On the final night of my stay, I pretended to be asleep as I heard those rusty hinges protest. The door slowly pulled open from the inside. All the confidence and determination I'd felt in the daylight was gone in an instant. In those moments where I wondered if someone would try and pull me out of bed and drag me into the dark, well, it suddenly hit me that the only things I had on me were my phone, less than an ounce of pepper spray, and a tiny keychain knife. Maybe, I thought wildly, frantically, maybe it would be easy enough to make me disappear inconspicuously after all. They'd have my credit card. What was stopping them from using it a few towns over and then throwing my luggage in a ditch? At the sound of furniture being pushed aside along the carpet, my thoughts became racing and jumbled as I clutched my little canister to my chest. I had always assumed Liz to be alive when someone took her out of the room and into the tunnel. But what if she hadn't been? What if they'd killed her? What if they did it right here? There had been blood in the small crawl space. Enough had soaked into the carpet that it was still wet by the time I went looking for her. Although I was physically in the room with her that night, I'm such a heavy sleeper that she might as well have been alone. A sharp pang of guilt crept in to mingle with the terror. After a moment, the sound of raspy, strained breaths filled the otherwise silent room, growing louder as whoever or whatever emerged and crept toward me, closer and closer. And then they stopped abruptly, seemingly hovering just a few feet away. I tried to keep my eyes squeezed shut and hoped they'd get just a bit closer. I was so worried that if they knew I was awake, they'd leave before I could find out what happened. My shitty plan had been to hit them with pepper spray and then take a picture of the intruder, and I knew I'd probably only get one chance at it. The waiting in those long moments was excruciating, though, as I wondered who or what was in the room with me. I finally couldn't take it. My eyes shot open. I'm not sure what I thought I'd see looming over me in the darkness, but I know who I did not expect to see. Liz. She was barefoot, and despite the faint moonlight shining through the silver between the curtains, her face was mostly obscured by shadows. What I could make out seemed contorted, as if with a strange little smile. I knew it was her, though. I could feel it. So, I didn't understand at the time why my sense of dread had only intensified since seeing her. I gasped, and she must have been as startled as I was, because she took off running, her gait awkward and clumsy. I had barely stumbled out of bed by the time she'd already ducked through the door, past the false wall, and was crawling through the unlit passageway. She moved so lithely, so comfortably, as if she belonged to the darkness more than she ever had to the light. I hissed her name, trying to get her to stop, but she just kept going. I tried to fight the flood of nagging thoughts. If she'd truly been okay all this time, why hadn't she left and contacted her fiancé Jared, or her family, or friends? Why was she creeping around in the darkness behind the walls of this awful place alone? But at the time, the only meaningful thought I could really focus on, almost overwhelming in its insistence, was how I couldn't lose her again. While I was fumbling for my phone, I realized that Liz didn't have any source of light with her. She'd entered the tunnel the same way she had all those years ago, in utter blackness. As I followed her, I finally realized what the smell in my room had been. That mixed with bleach had been almost too faint to detect. But there, in that tight space, just feet behind her, I recognized it. Earthiness. Death. I could tell that something was very wrong. But we were so close to the exit, and I was too focused on getting her out of here. All I wanted was to walk out that door and never come back. Not for my bag, my shoes, anything. Because I had a very strong suspicion that if I did, neither one of us would ever leave that hotel again. As we reached the end of the cramped passageway and stepped back into the familiar back room, I nearly cried in relief. We were only 2 flights of stairs above the exit. We were actually going to make it out. Both of us. But she didn't go down. Instead, she began to go up. Liz! I pleaded for her to come back. Told her I knew where the exit was, but she continued on, her back to me as if she hadn't heard me. I pulled at her in desperation, her face unreadable, obscured by her dark hair, but she shook me off with a strength I didn't know she possessed. I couldn't lose her to that place again, so, realizing she wasn't gonna stop, I reluctantly followed, thinking she must have known something I didn't. A better way out. She'd been the one holed up in the place, after all. It was the only thing that made any sense. She had slowed her pace to allow me to catch up, no longer fleeing now that she was leading. I had been occasionally pausing to shine my flashlight down below us, my sense of fear growing as the exit became further and further away, until it was eventually swallowed up by the darkness entirely. After what felt to my tired legs like a lifetime, she stopped and began to enter another crawl space, heading back deeper into the hotel. I froze. The already intense sense of wrongness overwhelmed me at the thought of going in. Her back still to me, she gestured for me to follow. I realized then that everything was going to be okay. I had found her. I knew that following her was the right thing to do. A wave of calmness washed over me and drowned out the pang of terror I'd felt at seeing what was on the other side of that tight, dark space. So, I took a deep breath and found out what was on the 7th floor. I instantly felt much safer than I had anywhere else in that godforsaken place as we stepped into the immaculate room that the crawl space opened into. This was a safe place. A good place, even. I was suddenly very confident that we were going the right way. I followed her clumsy, wavering form down a hallway leading to a massive ballroom. Art Deco details, the chandelier. It was beautiful. That much was obvious, even in the dark. I felt an odd sense of excitement at the thought of approaching it, nearly giddy at the sight of the elegant golden elevator at the end. The exit. Finally! My heart pounded and I froze for a moment when I heard a door slam shut somewhere behind me. But no matter how hard I tried to hold on to that concern, that intense feeling of alarm, I couldn't. It was quickly slipping through my fingers, and although the unease was not quite gone, it was beyond my reach. Everything was fine. Liz dropped onto her hands and knees and began to crawl as we approached the elevator. Her hair still cast a shadow over her face, but I could make out the white of her smile as she turned to look at me over her shoulder and disappeared into it. I knew I was where I needed to be. I was ready. I was only a few feet behind her when I tripped and fell to the side, hitting my face on something in the process. I felt around to see what I tripped over. It was a single shoe, the canvas stiff with long-dried blood, portions of its owner still inside. When I looked up from it with a squeal of shocked disgust, I realized that the entire room had changed. The air carried a hint of old things, mildew, despair. The chandelier hung askew at an odd angle, ruined, rendered dark and useless by decades of neglect. Glass from shattered and now boarded-up windows littered the warped and stained wooden floor, and the dated wallpaper had mostly peeled away. A sense of longing and ruin radiated through the huge room. Something else. Regret? Fear? I shivered as my beam illuminated what I had fallen into. A pile of disintegrating suitcases. Torn clothes and other discarded belongings were strewn about messily. I looked up to see that the space that had minutes before seemed to house the bright, golden elevator was actually empty, and likely had been for decades. With a new sense of horrified clarity, I realized that my clumsiness had spared me from stepping into the open elevator shaft. It had to have been the one that had been walled up on every other floor. That beautiful elevator was long gone, leaving only a few feet of damaged flooring between me and the 7-story drop below. Maybe, if I had been paying more attention, I would have noticed the sound sooner. the familiar, earthy rot smell on the stale air echoing from within it. But I was too focused on something else. Something white, bright in my phone light, and the torn sheet sheathing it. I told myself it couldn't be Liz. That the pitiful remains of fabric that settled into the spaces where there had once been skin couldn't be Melvin's shirt she bought at the concert we went to years before our stay. The one she always wore to bed. That shirt, the remains within it, those could have belonged to anyone. Because Liz was here with me. She was fine. The jagged screech of something sharp on metal snapped me out of it. The sound was soon drowned out by a chorus of awful, ragged breaths. I shined my flashlight to see her slowly climbing up from the dark, gaping pit of the shaft. Her eyes reflected light back at me, like an animal's, like a predator. Something that thrived in the darkness and could see far better in the lightless space than I could ever hope to. As we stared at each other, as I saw her face fully illuminated for the first time, I realized how wrong it all was. I was finally forced to admit what a part of me had already realized. That what I'd followed up there wasn't Liz. I couldn't understand how I hadn't seen it before. How I possibly could have mistaken that thing for my best friend. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought the not Liz was the most terrible thing I would ever see in my life, until I noticed more of them crawling up the shaft behind her. Many of them were utterly unlike anything I'd seen before, moving towards me on thin, sallow-fleshed limbs. A few of them, though, like the one I'd mistaken for Liz, if it weren't for the perfectly round eyes, they could have passed for human. Maybe they even were once. I was suddenly very keenly aware of the door I had heard open and close behind me in the hallway moments before. True fear, I've since learned, is seeing something you can barely comprehend, much less hope to outrun, standing between you and the only exit. I realized then that I'd lost my pepper spray at some point, so I did the first thing I could think of. I shined my phone's flashlight towards it, hoping that something so pale, that seemed so accustomed to the dark, that it wouldn't be able to handle the bright light. All I managed to do was get a clearer view of the two long limbs and those awful eyes as it continued towards me, unfazed. With the haze I'd been trapped in earlier lifted, I gagged at the reek of old decay that permeated the hallway, and had been taken up by the carpet and rotting wallpaper. Unlike on the third floor, no one had bothered to try and mask the smell with a splash of bleach here. Some doors had long fallen off their hinges, laying splintered and forming additional obstacles. I tried to unsuccessfully dodge the thing between me and the exit, but it managed to grab me with its jaws, leaving a deep gash in my leg as it tried to pull me to the ground. As I stabbed at it with my tiny knife, barely managing to break the skin, I realized this was the end. I truly was never going to leave this place. And then, it suddenly released me, as if pulled away by something unseen, giving me an opportunity to limp towards the end of the hall. I didn't look back as I made it to the room we'd entered through, 747 crudely painted on the door. This time around, I saw it was filled with the remains of decaying furniture, along with other things I'd rather forget. I was relieved to shove myself back into the tight, lightless passageway, but not as relieved as I was when I stepped out of it. I was almost to the exit when I heard a faint, wheezing breath above me. I made the mistake of looking up at the figure staring down at me from the shadowy stairwell. Mixed in amongst those alien forms were some that seemed almost human, including the one I'd mistaken for Liz. There was another face, wearing his usual predator's grin, standing between them and I, almost as if holding them back, helping me escape. The wrongness of it confused me, but I moved as fast as my tired, bleeding legs would carry me. The feel of those awful, round eyes trained on my back was an excellent motivator. I stumbled out the back exit, but didn't feel safe until the city skyline was no longer visible in my rearview mirror. I did make it home. I wish I had a better update to give. I still wonder who Liz thought she had seen in our room that night. Who it could have been she would have followed so blindly, so willingly. I try not to think about what must have happened next. It's too painful. I haven't been able to sleep much. I dream of the hotel, see those things staring at me from the shadowy stairwell. Another thing that's been keeping me awake since I've been back home have been the non-stop emails I've received, flooding my inbox, reminding me of an upcoming stay, one I never booked, counting down the days until I check in. There is no checkout date listed. There's something else, too. Something that scares me far more. I barely recognize myself now. At first, the differences were subtle enough that I could cling to denial, but it's become painfully obvious that I lose a bit more of myself each day. And not just in terms of the features reflected in the mirror, either. I realize now what this new invitation means. The check-in date. It's the date on which I can choose to either return to the hotel as the newest permanent resident, or stay here and become a danger to those around me. I've decided to accept it. My bags are packed, this time with something far more potent than pepper spray. I plan to arrive early, check in while I'm still in control. If I can help it, I'll be the last guest that is ever invited to room 347. It's sort of funny in a way. In those frantic moments in the cramped darkness, when I'd wildly feared that I'd never leave that hotel, I was right. Albeit in a way I never could have imagined. Other than this post, I haven't told anyone else where I'm going. If I am unsuccessful, I don't want anyone to find me. I have a sick feeling of what will happen to them if they do. If I'm successful, there will not be any more invitations to the hotel extended. There won't be a hotel at all. If I fail, well, if you do receive an email inviting you to stay, I hope that you ignore it, that you will not find yourself in room 347. If I fail, I hope that you and I will not meet in that dark, cramped space in the middle of the night. If I fail, I hope that you will not learn what I have the hard way. That it's not uncommon for people to visit that place and never leave. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed today's story. This one was written by JamFrans on Reddit. They're also posting on Shadowbox Archives on Patreon. I'll include links in the description for more of their work. They also recently came out with a short story collection called The Woman in the Walls and Other Stories, which is published by Black Widow Press. I'm going to include a link in the description for that one as well. For anybody who missed the last couple of videos I did and the last couple of posts I did, there's going to be a few small changes on the channel due to the recent demonetization, as we try to avoid some red flags that might set off the bots again. Unfortunately, we've been told there's a few red flags, potential red flags, and posting more than 3 times a week is one of them. Compilations may also be a potential issue. So, as I mentioned before, the schedule is going to be cut back a little bit, unfortunately, here. So, what I'm aiming to do is start posting Monday, Wednesday, Friday, starting next week. And as I mentioned before, this is going to allow me a little bit more time for writing, to get more Hollow's End out there, as well as curating just the best possible stories for you guys, and trying to do more longer stories. I know people really seem to enjoy the kind of 45 minutes to an hour length stories. I'll also be doing some shorter ones as well, but I'm going to kind of focus more on those longer ones. As I mentioned, the compilations, I did have to private those from the channel. The majority of those, the ones that are one long series, I'm going to try to keep those up. So like the Hollow's End compilations and, the Monster Hunter, anything that's like parts 1 through 4, parts 1 through 5 type of thing. I'm going to try to keep all those compilations up. They're just one story. Like I inherited a shifty bar from my uncle, that series, and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, for the people who have commented saying they really love the compilations, I really do apologize. I wish I didn't have to do that, but and if I had more information from YouTube, who knows? I might have been able to do things a little bit differently. But yeah, I've asked for specifics a few times, and they've said that they cannot give specific information. They cannot give any editorial commentary on my videos, and even when I've asked these sort of more broad questions, they haven't been able to tell me an answer. So basically, right now, all we have to go off of is these leaked conversations from other creators who have partner managers, and so that's basically where I'm getting this information right now. So it's not just coming out of nowhere. This is allegedly straight from YouTube. So yeah, I'm just doing what I can to try to keep the channel up and keep it going, because like, as well as being my passion, this is also my livelihood. So I have to be a little bit careful what I do here. In some positive news, as a result of all this, I'm going to have more time to be posting bonus content on Patreon. I'm going to have more time to do writing, self-publishing, as well as creating the occasional audiobook. So keep an eye on the channel for more information on that stuff. Spotify is also going to be filling the gaps when I'm off from YouTube. So if you're looking for a story on Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday, those days when I'm not posting to YouTube, check out Spotify. There's going to be a new video posted there on each of those days. I'm re-uploading a lot of the old classics, a lot of the ones that people really love, with new music, new graphics, and I'll also be posting some new stuff over there as well. And yeah, if you want to check out the Patreon, right now is a really good time. You can sign up for a week free to see what the Patreon's all about. If you want to see what sort of content is on there, head over to patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror for more info about that. And you can also have your name featured as a character in an upcoming Hollow's End story, if you're interested in that. I'm going to have more information about the Welcome to Hollow's End book release coming Monday with the new Hollow's End Sheriff story. We should have paperback links and hardcover links on Monday, so be sure to check that out this coming Monday, June 22nd. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day.